Hey Luke.
Yep.
I'll give you $10 if you get that right up to your elbow. Stick your arm in there, right up to your elbow and hold it there.
$10 is not enough. All right, welcome to today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. We're live on site, and you know that means that something technical's got to go wrong. But I've got Greg from Seawise. Thank you for coming on, Greg.
No problem. It's a pleasure to be here, and welcome to Seawise.
And Brenton's behind the camera. Brenton from the Aussie Lawn. We are at a proper composting facility, and I wanted to get you one. I told you this before, but for the audience, because we use this sort of stuff. We actually use your direct products. People around the country are using similar composts. I never knew where they came from, and I wanted to find out exactly how they were made. So where are we at right now? Because this is the finished product, right?
Yep, so we're currently at Seawise's Nambeela operations facility. A little bit about Seawise. We've been around for 28 years. Mm-hmm. We've been making a batch of compost every week for those 28 years. And when I think about our business, it's really interesting that we're one of the largest privately owned composters in Western Australia. We're licensed to produce 90,000 tonnes of compost a year. So a lot of stuff coming in, a lot of processing going on. You might hear some big wheel loaders rolling around doing the work because I don't really like getting on the compost turner myself. But, let's roll into it.
All right, well, so what have we got here?
So this is probably what most of your customers in Western Australia are hopefully putting on their lawn. So this is our Seawise Plush lawn. So this is a maturity level 2 compost. It's ultra fine, meant to be used as a top dresser.
And we use this a lot. Now, a lot of people who are just listening to this, I'll describe it for you. Very black, very dark. Now and warm. Now you told me how much carbon this roughly gets.
Yep. So this is about 44% carbon.
Which is nuts.
Yes, that's right. And this is what's going to give you the energy to develop really good soil, because when you put this on your lawn, the microbiology in your soil is going to get so excited that they're going to go nuts.
Now, you said to me just before, better grab your glasses there. You said to me just before that 1% raise in carbon in the soil, how much extra water holding capacity was that adding?
150%.
Which is like 1% is nothing.
Yep.
150% is literally everything and a half again.
That's right, and that's the benefit of it, is that you can put this under your turf, you put it on top of your turf, get that carbon into the soil, and that just enables it creates this sponge, which of course in Western Australia we got sands that you put the sprinklers on, doesn't matter how long you run them for, it just runs straight through.
It either sits on the surface when it's hydrophobic and then evaporates away, or it just goes straight through.
That's right, and takes all the nutrients with you. So it takes all the nutrients with it. So what you see is that if you can create this sponge of carbon in the soil, is that these larger particles that you'll see in this material, like these actually work like little natural soil crystals. So they will soak up the moisture and they'll hold on to that.
Yes.
And that's what we do. So if you look at a compost, it should smear into your hand, and that's how we know that these stuff's broken down. And you can actually see that little black fine stuff coming off in my hands, and that's what we call, or that's how we create humus. Now, humus is like the layer of skin on top of the planet. It's really thin, but it's really important for everything that you do.
Yeah, I've heard that many times, that word. The clumping nature of this. So this is actually something I was going to ask you about, which is practically a negative for me, but I kind of knew what it was. When we go to the soil yard and this stuff has been sitting, because this is the freshest stuff at the front, right? You get a couple of loads of stuff at the back sort of been compacted a little bit, and you get the clumps, and I can see some clumps over there, right?
Yep.
And that's a great sign of the quality of the soil. Very frustrating when you've got a top dresser that's just throwing lumps. We got to go over and we got to crash them all down, and then it sticks to my boots. And it's kind of like it's a win-loss, because it's the really good quality stuff that I want in the soil, but it's also really frustrating to work with on top dressing. Now, what I was really going to get at is I've bought stuff from the shops in bags. There's no clumping nature at all.
Yep.
So what's the difference between and they're not cheaper either, because it's per kilo, it's super expensive. What's the difference between a clumping nature of this and a non-clumping nature?
Yep.
And they're not cheaper either, because it's the per kilo, it's super expensive. Super expensive. What's the difference between a compost that is kind of looks and feels a little bit more like, if we're honest, a bit of a really fine mulch, compared to something that's actually starting to get that sticky nature?
So typically it's maturity, which is backed by processing time. So if you think that, we need carbon to compost. Compost is predominantly carbon. That carbon will come to us in the form of like perhaps cereal waste or straw or sawdust or green waste, something like that.
Yeah.
That carbon at that point in time is typically, it's sharp, it's dry, and it's hydrophilic, or it hates water.
Yes.
So the composting process there is designed to take that dry, sharp, hard carbon and turn it into a soft, complex carbon nature. And by doing that, it creates that hydrophobic, where it just wants to grab moisture. So if you have an immature compost, it's typically going to be drier than a more mature compost. And the interesting thing about compost, and you've probably found this when you're spreading it on your lawn as well, is that if you let it dry out too much, it's really hard to wet again.
Yes.
So when compost leaves our yard, and this is, we've been in a week of 32 degrees in Perth, it's starting to dry out a bit on the yard. Before this leaves our yard, this will be re-wet,
Yes.
so that when you apply it in the field, it's ready to go. It doesn't go hydrophobic and all that
I think you got it backwards before, because you said hydrophilic.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
and then hydrophobic, but I knew exactly
you
what
can
you
edit
meant.
that out, right?
We'll edit some better looks on me as well.
Yeah.
So
if we just look at this pile,
Yeah.
Luke, if you look at this pile where it's dry on the outside, right? If I squeeze that, it's really friable, because it just doesn't have the moisture in those small particles to
Yeah.
create that glue. But if I get into here a little bit further, and you can
already see the
you
colour
can see
difference.
that this is alive in here, because it's quite warm. But if I grab some of that,
it is
starts
clumping.
to clump
Definitely
together.
clumping.
And this is what we want. But if we do a squeeze test for our compost to work out the maximum, good moisture level, if you can hear it sort of squelch in your hand, forms a clump, but you can easily break it apart,
Yes.
then that's perfect. That's ready to go.
Is that someone's entire job title here? Squeeze tester.
We-
We're going to get Shirley. Squeeze tester Shirley's on the job now.
Believe it or not, it is still the most accurate way to determine compost moisture. We have electronic moisture meters that sit there and do that, and that's good. But obviously, our guys in a front end loader need to be able to tell that the compost is right moisture. So we actually calibrate hands.
We need a trade person then. It sounds like you're the
Do you know what this reminds me of? Have you ever watched Clarkson's Farm?
Yeah, I have.
Did you know the scene where they're testing... Just wait for this truck to go past.
That'd be one of your
That's exactly
one
what
of your suppliers, Luke, I imagine.
That's exactly the supply. Well, one of them that we buy from. What I was saying is, on Clarkson Farm, there's a thing. I think it was with the wheat, and they needed a certain amount of moisture content in the wheat.
Yeah,
and
right.
There was an experienced farmer with Clarkson, and you might remember this scene. And the guy just bites it,
Yeah, okay.
and he predicted the water content like as accurately as the actual machine did.
Yeah.
And he was going through just biting stuff. And I was very impressed. So it's exactly the same process. Someone who's got experience, and a calibrated hand, as you would say.
That's right. Yeah, so that's I reckon that moisture's probably about 36-38%.
Where's your moisture meter?
Yeah, that's right. I'll have to get him to prove that. Of course, I'm the CEO, so everything I say is right. But but the heat comes from the fact that it's still biologically active,
Yeah.
and it's a maturity 2 product. So this will retain a bit of heat. It will keep processing on the pad. And if I was to keep giving this a little bit of water and turning it and loving it,
gets hotter, doesn't it?
it'd go to maturity 3. It'd take itself to the full length. It'd just keep working and...
Okay, so maturity levels.
Yep.
Right. I haven't heard about maturity levels since I was in high school,
Okay.
because mine were very low.
Yeah.
But what is...
I suffered the same syndrome.
Exactly. So compost, you were saying maturity 2 before.
Yep.
Now, before we recorded, you're talking about maturity 3.
Yes.
So these are categories. Clearly, there must be. What's the lowest? Is it 1? Does it go negative?
No, there's a moisture level. Sorry, maturity level 1 through to 3. There's 3 stages.
Okay.
And it's got a lot of factors that play into what makes a compost maturity level 3 around free ammonia and cation exchange capacity and all these lots of technical terms. But the easiest way I describe it is availability of nitrogen. So chicken manures are typically maturity level 1. So that nutrient is available right away. It's there, it's soluble, it comes out and it goes.
Right.
Maturity level 2 is the carbon's been processed a little bit further. It's on its way to becoming optimum, but the nitrogen or the nutrients there's some that are readily available and there are some that are like a little bit slow release. And maturity level 3 is where the compost is fully processed, fully mature, really stable. It would be cool to touch because it's the energy in the carbon has progressed to where it's happy to sit.
Right.
And that will be typically only a little bit immediately available, but lots of long-term availability of nutrients. And that's the carbon that gets into the ground and really ignites these soil microbiology, which start the nitrogen process, the phosphorus process, the sulfur process. It kick-starts all of those processes in your soil.
How long would I have to leave this? So let's say I just bought a cubic meter of this and I dumped it in my backyard. This is maturity level 2.
Yep.
Could I leave it and it would just get to maturity level 3, or do I need to aerate it? Do I need to do other things?
You really need to give it some love, is what we'd call it. So you'd want to turn it, say once every week or so, give it a bit of water. Make sure it squelches every time you pick it up and off you go.
Taking on some dates. But how long would it take? So if I'm doing that sort of stuff?
Probably another 3 months or so.
Okay. Oh, that's not as long as I thought.
No, that's right. But you do have to love it. It's like any other pet. You have to make sure it gets water. You have to make sure it has food, which is in the pile. And you've got to make sure it can breathe.
Right, and that's the problem I guess here in WA is that the water part would be difficult to do at your own home. So now talking about the different maturities, can you go too far? Can you leave it too long and it ends up becoming soiled or rotten or anything like that? No,
as long as you keep it aerated and keep the moisture levels right. I've seen compost at a yard where they've just put it aside to do exactly that, and when you pick it up, it's like picking up Vegemite. Like it's smeary, it's really lovely.
Wow!
And that's the stuff that we use to make our liquid compost extracts.
Well, I feel like this is a great transition moment because we started at the end, which is a bad idea. Can we go back to the beginning?
Yep.
I want to see the stuff that you bring in, and we go from this is what we're bringing in, and go through the process, and I guess we can eventually come back here.
Yep, too easy.
Sounds good. So great, we moved to a different part. We're walking past a hell of a lot of piles of all sorts of different types of, I guess compost would be the word. What are we standing next to here? Because this sounds like it's the sort of the start of the process, right? Yeah,
so where we're at now is we're at stage 4 of our garden line. So our garden line is predominantly driven, the carbon source comes from community-based green waste. So from our local shires, they bring in green waste, and we use about 80-odd thousand tonnes of green waste a year.
So I'll just pause you there for a second, because most of the contractors and professionals, this is what they're dumping at the local tip, right?
That's right, yep.
And then this is eventually making it to you.
Yeah, and then we grind that up so we get it to an optimum size for composting. Then from the garden line perspective, we add community-based organic byproducts. So it might be some brewery sludge, might be some grease trap from restaurants, might be some wash waters from a food processing facility, or it might be the food that food bank can't use. So the apples that have gone too far, all that sort of stuff comes into us. And we call that a byproduct, not a waste.
Is there any stuff that might be surprising in that it can't be used for compost?
Not really. I mean, the best thing about composting is that if it was once living, we can compost that.
Right.
So we know that, fossil fuels are created from dinosaurs and rainforests that have effectively composted millions of years ago.
Yes.
And that's where we're along that stage, except we stop it before it comes to oil. So we like to have it as a solid form at this stage.
I was thinking about, so actually before we get to that point, we said in the meeting before, you said community liquid waste.
Yep.
And I just thought human piss, right?
Yeah.
If I'm most honest. And then you were like, no, we don't use any human byproduct. Is there reasons that, because I would think that other than smell, wouldn't there be benefits to using human
There
waste?
is, but predominantly there's better treatment systems for that. So that all
Okay.
goes to Water Corp, predominantly sewage. It gets treated in their process. The biosolids that come out of that, so the solid component typically goes to farmland to be spread. They make the water, if you're in the northern suburbs, they're trying to re-inject that into the Nangara pine plantation to replenish that Perth's northern water supply.
Right.
Down along the southern suburbs, it generally goes out to sea either from Point Perrin or from Hall's Head in Mandurah.
Yeah, sure.
So-
they dump it all out where we are.
Yeah, possibly.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks government. I mean, gee.
But so what we're setting is stage 4. So this has been on process for a minimum of probably 6 to 7 weeks. And what we can see in here is that it's starting to get dark. It's darkened up. You know, it's nice and hot. This white stuff that you're seeing is what we call fire fang. And it's just a type of fungi that grows underneath
Right.
as part of the composting process.
I've seen that white stuff heaps of times. Say, like, I've got a lot of lawn clippings in my trailer,
Yep.
and you might be leaving them over a week as you're trying to, you're filling up the trailer, and then you go dump them, and as you're dumping them at the tip, I'm getting that white sort of fungal.
Yeah, that's right, and that's just a type of, for the scientists out there, that's an actinomycetes, but it's effectively just a fungi that's growing because it's optimum conditions, lots of air, lots of food, lots of carbon. It's really happy. Now, we spoke about the squelch test before, so if you grab a bit of this, you can really hear that squelch into that.
Hopefully that's picking up on my microphone that I was putting right next to it for those listening. It is wet, very wet. You're putting a lot of water on top of this. I see back there, the sprinkler's going. It's talking about the moisture content before.
Yep.
So none of this would work properly if you weren't putting water on it, right?
No, you have to have moisture. It has to be about 50 to 55% moisture to compost.
I'm looking over there.
Yep.
That's a dam. Is it a lake?
Yep, that's one of our ponds where we capture our stormwater over winter. So whatever runs off our pad, we capture into there, and then we bring that back into the process. So we try not to let anything go to waste here. So we know we need water over our long dry summers to keep the compost there. So we recycle that water back into the composting process.
In winter, is rain enough?
It can be, but each of these piles, they're about 1,500 cubic metres, they're about 1,000 tonne.
Okay.
To take the green waste from 25% moisture to 50% moisture, I need to double that. So I need about 1,000 tonne of water to increase the moisture.
And so, Perth, we get quite a bit of rain in winter,
Yeah.
but we're not the wettest place.
No, I don't think we've had any significant rain here since about the end of September.
Well, I mean, this is, I talk about this all the time on the podcast.
Yep.
It's getting windy, so I hope that this is picking up. But we get just no rain. Last 2 years, summer has just been horrible. So it's interesting you got that challenge, but also you're kind of solving the problem for a lot of us gardeners, because that's what we talked about, 1% more carbon,
Yep.
150% more water in the soil.
That's exactly right. And if my compost goes out dry, for instance, when we go out to Broadacre Agriculture, we're still shipping it out at 50% moisture, because otherwise what happens is that, you think we're dry in summer, well, they're dry in winter. Most wheat grows in about 400 to 500 millimetres of rainfall.
It's just nuts.
If the compost that they're applying to help their plants grow or help their wheat grow is suboptimal in moisture, then the first millimetres of rain, it actually takes away from the plant to re-wet the compost.
Yes.
So it has to go out there ready for, fit for purpose, ready to go.
Yeah.
And that's the same with your gardens. You don't want to be putting this stuff in dry because it's really hard to re-wet it.
So this is the stuff, basically, I'm just reiterating what we said. A lot of stuff's coming from the tip. You're using beer and other liquid byproducts.
Yep.
Now, we've got some massive chunks though.
Yep.
Do you mulch them down further?
So what we'll do from here is that this is stage 4. It'll actually roll into what we call a curing pile, or stage 5, where it's not on air. And the idea there is just to let the compost start to cool a little bit, just to relax, right? And then we make sure it's at optimal moisture, and then we'll put it through one of our screens. And our screens typically break that down into sub 16 millimeters, which becomes a soil conditioner, and 16 to 60 millimeters, which becomes our mulch.
Yep.
And then these larger particles that you see, they'll go into what we call the oversize, and we'll regrind them to make them
Nice.
go back through. What we don't like seeing in our green waste though is like something like that,
Big rock.
which is someone's granite stone out of their garden.
Mate, yeah, it is granite, isn't it?
And
Gee.
the interesting thing about that is that it's made it from the green waste that's been ground at the tip
Yeah.
into my stockpile, through my wetting process, and it's still here at stage 4, right? So
Well, granite's not very hard, is it?
No,
You don't have
that's
to worry about wrecking any
No.
machinery.
no, not at all.
Can we go over here for a second?
Yep.
Partly to get out of the wind. I don't have headphones on, people, so I really hope... Oh, we're getting into the wind. I want to have a look at... I want to talk about this thing right here,
Okay.
which is, if we just stand on our backs to the wind,
Yep.
hopefully that protects it. There's a few of these here. These are basically giant blowers.
Yes.
So, how important... It must be very important to get the air underneath them. I can see, is that a thermometer that you have in
Yep,
there
that's
as well?
right. Yep.
So tell me about all this that's going on here, because I'm clueless on all of this.
So this is what we call our mobile aerating floor. So when Seawise first started, we used to use a compost turner. Looked
Yes.
like a big praying mantis. It sort of spread across the big windrows. The guy sort of flipped up. It was a really cool machine to drive. And you'd drive across the row, and every day has a big drum, and we turn our compost stockpile.
Yes.
And that's really good. Works really well.
That's what we do at home.
Yep.
With the compost tumbler or one of those little spinny aerator things you get for $15 at Bunnings.
That's right. And if you've got, say, 100 litres of compost, that's probably really good to use to do that.
Yeah.
When you're trying to make 90,000 tonne, you need to get a bit better at it. And so what the windrows required was they needed lots and lots of hard stands. So we'd be laying concrete, big areas of concrete where we can lay our windrows out nicely, drive up, and we'd get around probably once every 2 days we'd turn those piles. What we found though is that after about 50 minutes in a really biologically active pile, you're below suboptimal oxygen.
Wow.
So you're not actually,
So not even an hour.
not even an hour, you're not composting in an oxygen-rich environment. So what we did was said this, and in sense of carbon, also the bad side of carbon, the carbon dioxide going up into the atmosphere, that was burning about 120 litres an hour worth of diesel,
Yes.
right? So that's just not sustainable going forward.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah,
That's a lot of lawnmowers.
and it's
to
working.
get that much an
and
hour.
it's working really hard. So what we did is we did a worldwide search looking for a better technology that we could use, and we landed with a guy called Martin Hauk, who's from Germany. His family's been composting for
Yep.
3 or 4 generations, whatever. And he designed this system called a mobile aerating floor. And it looks pretty simple, right? Big blower, 4 pipes under the pile. We've got one that's disconnected there. That's not optimal, but it looks like there's a bit of leachate coming out of that pile. So it's just trying to, the boys are just trying to drain the water out of the pipe before they go. But what that fan does is it pushes 2,000 cubic metres of air an hour through that pile.
Right.
But it's run on a timer, so it only runs for 2 minutes in every 10.
I've been noticing it keeps turning on and
Yeah,
off.
so that's on a timer. And what we achieve through there is we achieve about 8 to 10 air exchanges through that pile a day,
Compared to one a
in
fortnight.
compared to
whatever you-
one every 2 days.
Oh, 2 days, sorry.
Yeah. So what we do is we're actually keeping optimal oxygen there for the entire composting process. Now, in terms of this production line, It used to take 32 weeks to get to our final stage where we were happy to screen the compost.
Right.
On MAF, we're doing that in 8 weeks.
And maths is not married at first
No,
sight.
I'm not married at first sights.
No.
Not a fan, but I'm
Neither
sure
am
there's
I.
plenty of your viewers that are. but the mobile aerating floor is also only a 1 kilowatt fan. So for 500 cubic meters of compost, it's the most energy efficient and space efficient composting system in the world.
Right, so that makes a lot of sense. So like, you're using 120 litres an hour of diesel
Yep.
with your praying mantis, which sounds like a really interesting...
It was a cool machine.
That's
yeah.
the sort of thing you want to bring your kids to?
Next podcast, we can take you up to the farm that bought it off us.
Right. One thing that goes through my head as the business guy, right? What does one of these blowers cost? Because they look really simple. I'm sure they're not cheap though.
They are really simple. There's a lot of fluid dynamics into the design. So each of those pipes has 9 meters of holes. You know, the big pipe that you see going across there is what we call the plenum, and that equalises the pressure from the fan so that you get even air distribution along there. To be honest, I couldn't tell you what they're worth, but my commercial manager can. But
Well, I'm just wondering from like, because how many are there? Dozens and dozens.
yeah, we own about 140.
Oh wow, that's a lot more than, that's literally a dozen dozens.
Yeah, and we're Australian agents for these, so there's probably 12 sites on the eastern states that utilise this same system to process their FOGO, their curbside FOGO, or their food organics and garden organics bins that WA is slowly starting to introduce.
So there's a few Zinger boxes worth of blowers here.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next bit.
Okay, off to area 1.
Right, so Greg, where are we now in the whole scheme of things?
So where we are now is we're about stage 2 of our farm line. So we're in our garden line before, and this is our farm line. So the way our production lines are named is that the feedstocks that we use, or the organic byproducts that we use to start the composting process, also leads to where they generally want to go. So this is a farm line. So in here we take cereal waste, we take a little bit of sawdust, we take manures and other organic byproducts to come in. So typically farm-based ingredients that then go out to broadacre agriculture. So this is most of this material that we're looking at here is destined to go east of the Scarp to grow either canola or oats in the wheat belt of WA.
Right. And you were telling me that the amount that's actually used, so we might do 5 mil or 10 mil top dress on a lawn.
Yep.
But they're getting great benefit from very little actually spread. Like, how much are you putting on a farm?
Yeah, so it's probably about 2 to 3 tonnes per hectare, and that is about a 2 millimetre dusting.
Yeah.
Now, the best thing about that is that one of our customers this year has given us his entire nutrition program. So he's turned away from synthetic fertilisers, a little bit of phosphorus when the seed goes down the air seeder tube, but after that, it's 100% compost. So with that 2 millimetre or 3 millimetre of dusting on top of that surface, he's actually reducing his reliance on nitrogen-based synthetic fertiliser. But more importantly for me, where everything I do is carbon focused, he's reduced his carbon footprint by 70%.
Right,
So
because the fertiliser production creates
It's so high in carbon, yeah.
Yep.
And what we're seeing with that 2 to 3 millimetres, it really goes in along with their minimum till agriculture, where they're allowing soil to form outside of the furrow that the seed goes into. And I was unaware of this until last year, but the accuracy of their seeding equipment, because it uses surveying satellites, is within 25 millimetres of where it was last year. So the soil interrow, what they call it, the interrow soil is allowed to develop into soil rather than once upon a time they might have turned it over with disc ploughs and broken it up again. Now they allow it to form because they're finding that that's now getting earthworms in it and bringing all these microorganisms or creatures back into the soil, which is so important when you're trying to cycle nutrients and trying to cycle carbon and just really build soil.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that the stuff that you would get from the garden waste, like what we would use as contractors, we dump it at the tip, that ends up being garden products.
Yep.
Or targeted to that kind of market. And your cereals, things like that. Is that any specific, is there a benefit to doing it that way, or is it maybe just makes sense from a production standpoint?
It's interesting, but we're very big in the circular economy. We like there's not a waste in the world. If it can be reused, we call it a byproduct. So we've worked hard to establish relationships with the producers of these byproducts. So you think China used to be the biggest processor of rolled oats for Australia.
Yeah.
So our oats would go to China, it'd get rolled, it'd come back as rolled oats, which would go into muesli bars, porridge, whatever you want to make out of it, right? But because when you process oats, 40% of that is waste. That's husk.
Right.
So China couldn't deal with the amount of husk, right? So China's pretty big. They're pretty good at dealing with lots of things.
Yep.
They couldn't deal with it. So what happened is that processing now comes back into Australia. Now, in Western Australia, there's about 70,000 tonnes of oat husk that doesn't have a home every year.
Wow.
So
70,000 tonnes, and oat husk is incredibly light.
yeah,
So the volume would be.
it's huge,
Yeah.
right? So we've worked with suppliers to say, and the extra step is that the processors have storage for husk of about 8 to 12 hours. So if it's not constantly going, they can't keep processing. So we're their whole. So they come to us. They just bring the oat husk, and you've seen the large areas. We'll have a look at a stockpile when we turn around and walk a little bit further. But we take that in. We use that as our carbon source on our farm line because it's really clean carbon. And although Australian standard 4454, which is what we all compost to, and if you're using it, if you're buying your products from Bunnings, perhaps it'll be on that bag that it's composted in accordance with 4454. But 4454 allows a contamination level of 1.6% weight for weight of glass and plastic.
Oh.
So if you're buying 100 kilos, it can have 1.6 kilos of glass and plastic in it. Now, not too many home gardeners want glass and plastic in their garden. So while I have to produce it to that standard, my farmers' tolerance for plastic and glass is 0.
Yes.
So that's why we use the oats as a feedstock, really clean, high quality carbon, which gives you high quality compost.
Right. So basically there is a benefit. It's not necessarily nutritional or anything. It's just that practically you're not going to get a granite rock in your oat husk like
That's
we found
right.
at the bottom of the pile on the other side.
Yeah.
And you still got the aerator machines?
Yeah, we use mobile aerated floors everywhere. We aerobically compost, so we want to keep that oxygen up.
Aerobic compost. Sounds like some sort of dance move.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to the next section.
This is where the future of Seawise is going to be. So we've looked at lots of enclosures and concrete tunnels. They're out there and they do a good job. But concrete tunnels for our size facilities, probably about $5 to $6 million worth of concrete tunnel.
Right.
So we set about to build like an enclosure that specifically tailored around MAF, and because our
Mobile aerating
floor,
Yep.
and because my owners are entrepreneurial innovators, there was a few other design factors. So it had to be IKEA-able, which is flat packed, arrive in a container or on a truck.
from Sweden, yeah.
Yes, and it needs to be Lego concept. So, you know, all our kids have Lego, right?
Yep.
But one block can do multiple functions in the system. So this is where we're at. We've got a bespoke frame that holds our features, if you like, and then we have a dome shelter which you can buy. You know, they're commercially available.
Yep.
But the secret is, if we look into the far one, you can actually see where we're starting to install our cocoon, and the cocoon is where the magic is going to happen.
Which is that tarp that you're
It's the
talking
tarp
about?
that's hanging in.
Do we want to walk over there
Yep.
and get a close-up look?
So if you can think that there's a pile of compost within that enclosure.
If I could just stop you for a second, Greg, because there's a lot of people who are listening to this. I feel like I'm basically standing in what's almost like an air hanger that's for compost, and there's two big walls, there's massive exit in, out, and a big dome on top. And you just started to talk about basically what looks to me like a very big tarp on a frame.
Yep.
So what does this do?
So if we can picture our pile, 500 cubic metre of pile in there, and if you're watching the video, you can see the line of where the compost typically lands
Yep.
and sits against there. That frame is designed to lower that cocoon
Yes.
really close to the compost pile.
Right.
And what that does is that enables us absolute 100% process control, because instead of having all this open air around our compost, we've got a very tiny amount of air. So when we speak about, potential plant pathogens or something coming through, so diseases coming through our compost, we use a process called pasteurisation,
Yes.
which is heat treatment, and we have to keep our compost at 55 degrees, above 55 degrees for 15 days to achieve pasteurisation. So you see multiple stages here, and the stages is also to put the outside of the pile on the inside and the inside on the outside, so we achieve total pasteurisation of everything as we roll along our facility. This cocoon coming down effectively means I can get the air above that pile to 55 degrees, which means the whole pile is pasteurised.
So do you have any, 55 degrees is, it's hot, but it's not fire hot.
No,
Is it possible to accidentally start a fire in a place like this?
not in a controlled process. So because we're at 55% moisture and we've got aeration, we can control the temperature so that it doesn't get to the hundreds and tens.
Yeah.
Where you do get fires though is in what we call orphan piles. So we have
Parents didn't love them, and
Yeah.
they got a bit angry.
and they get a bit angry and they incinerate. Yeah. But what you find there is that because they're not getting the love that I keep talking about with the compost, got to love the compost, they dry out and they get hot spots, and then the air comes through, lots of oxygen, ideal situation, and they go up. So we might, lawn clippings, really good for starting fires in green waste,
Yes.
because they got so much nitrogen, they just get so hot, and then the leaves are dry on the outside and they just incinerate, right? That's a real risk that we manage once we're in process.
Right. So basically, are you considering, there's just two that I can see here.
Yep.
Are you wanting to move down a path where most of this side of it is covered like this?
Yeah, so our new facility at East Kerala, so we're moving to a larger facility. We're yet to turn the soil, but the planning documents are in. Is about 2 kilometres to the north of me here, and that first stage, which is our most smelly stage or putrescible stage, where it's really ripe, if you like,
Yep.
will be enclosed in tunnels to capture the odour and control that. And then we haven't seen our large rainwater ponds, but I capture 50 to 60 million litres of water from rainfall here every year.
You personally?
Personally, I go out and run around and grab it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's very impressive. That's got to be a world record.
Yeah, the body doesn't show it, but I'm incredibly fit. But that's also a risk to me, because that's 50 million litres that I have to use over summer so that I'm ready for next winter.
Because you get too much of a flood.
Yeah, so our new facility at East Kerala, we're actually spending a lot of money on roofs so that it will all be roofed, so that we can so that I control the moisture all year round, not Mother Nature during winter.
Yeah. Bloody Mother Nature. One thing that keeps going through my head, we talked about this a little bit when we weren't recording, is that there is so much infrastructure, tooling, people. We talked about the fans briefly, but we were walking past the digger and you said it was $400,000.
Yep.
We're going to look at some screens, one which you called Magic Mike,
Yep.
$1 million. Mate, there's a lot that goes into this. I'm just appreciating, I guess, the effort. And it's not just clearly because we're talking about it, but if I looked at a bag of compost, I would typically just go, someone's just chucked some green waste into something, left it in the pile for a while.
Yep.
This is a lot more complicated and involved than I first thought.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so much science involved. So because if our farm line's a little bit different, because we do use what we call first intent byproducts. So the oats and the straw and the manure, you can make the same cake every week. Mm-hmm. With our garden line, where we're taking, one week we might get, lots of brewery sludge and not a lot of grease trap.
Yeah.
But we need to understand the science of all of our ingredients, because after 12 weeks, I still want the same cake.
Yes.
So within my team of 40, we've got 40 staff out here, 20 of those are typically scientists, like chemists, environmental scientists, soil scientists, biologists, all that sort of earthy science
So
stuff.
half the people here are scientists.
Yeah.
You've got a science background yourself.
Yeah, I'm an environmental scientist by trade, and I specialise in surface
I
water
love how
and
you said
groundwater
it by trade.
by trade.
Typically, people are like, I'm a carpenter by trade.
Yeah.
I'm a plumber by trade. And you're like, I'm an environmental scientist. I don't think I've ever heard anybody else be like that. But obviously, I guess you're not going to be so high and mighty about it.
Well, the thing is that, as the CEO, CEOs can come from different walks of life.
Yep.
It's just that I'm an environmentally trained CEO, and I run a composting facility, which is all about, taking carbon and putting it back into the earth, which is where we need it.
Yep. Right. So there's a lot going on. It's very complicated. Can you show us some of these machines now?
Yep, we
Are
can head
ready for
across
that
and
start?
have a look at Magic Mike, or we can go through our pantry first. Up to you guys.
Let's go through the pantry first,
Okay,
because
well, we're
it
here.
sounds like it's less walking. So Greg, we're in front of some mushroom compost.
Yep.
You're telling me that a lot of the mushroom compost here is actually from you.
Yes, 100% of mushroom compost, true mushroom compost supplied in Western Australia, or 99%, comes from us.
I might just stand closer to you as a windbreak.
Yep,
I'm not moving in romantically.
that's fine.
So, mushroom compost, what are we using that for at the end? Because I've seen it so much
Yep.
in sort of like yards and things like that. What am I getting out of mushroom compost that I'm not really getting out of maybe the plush lawn or what the farmers are getting?
Mushroom compost is probably one of the most well-known composts in Australia. To go back to the start of the process, they take wheat straw, they add gypsum and chicken manure to it. They turn it, they process it. That's called stage 1 mushroom compost. It then goes up to the mushroom farm where it's initially put into tunnels, and they compost it further to make stage 2. And what they do in those tunnels is that they pasteurise it, like we spoke before. But they bring it up to a very high temperature, and then they slowly step it down over temperature, which builds the complexity of the carbon.
Yes.
They then sterilise it, pack it into trays, and inoculate it with this mushroom spore. Now, sometimes people will come back to us during winter and they'll say, "Oh, I've just put your mulch on my, or some plush lawn on, and I've got mushrooms everywhere, or toadstools," right?
Yep.
People shouldn't be concerned about that, because they're just the flowers of fungi.
Yep.
So if you've got soil fungi, good soil fungi, you'll get the flowers because they're happy and they're growing.
Yes. But you want fungus in the soil.
That's right, you need fungus in the soil. But what these guys are doing is they're taking a very controlled composting process, and costs about $400 a tonne to make.
Wow.
Mushroom compost. And they're using it to grow one species of fungi. Okay, so process control, biosecurity, hygiene has to be immense.
Yes. It's not that we've had any controversial mushrooms being eaten in this country in the last couple of years.
You went there, not me.
But you really don't want to get it wrong in that industry, is what I'm getting at.
That's right, yeah. So, and they're also growing for a human food, right?
Yep.
And you go, well, how can they make any money out of $400 a tonne compost, right, to grow these mushrooms? Well, mushrooms are about $9 a kilo, and they grow 50 kilos of mushrooms on about 200 litres, right, of compost.
Right.
So their conversion rate's about 10 to 12 times what they pay for it. But despite that, mushroom compost is a really good circular economy story. So we start with these wheat straw and other byproducts like chicken manure and stuff like that. They make a compost. They then grow mushrooms on it for 13 weeks.
Yep.
Then it comes back to us.
So it's not good for them to reuse anymore?
No, so it's spent.
Yeah.
At that stage it's spent, it's used all its nutrients for that specific fungi, and then we bring it back here. Now, probably 80% of the retail yards in Perth have mushroom compost, and that's the spent mushroom compost
Yes.
that comes from there. So it goes back, and we use some of it in our farm line because of the sulphur
Right.
that plants like canola like sulphur.
Yes.
But effectively, this is where the circular economy, it starts as a product, it gets used for its product, and then it goes back into the ground, into the soil, into the garden, home gardeners.
Essentially, everything is waste here. That gets reused into something else.
Byproduct.
Right.
We speak about byproducts, we don't speak about wastes.
Well,
I look forward to a world where there are no wastes, where everything has a use somewhere else in a different industry.
right. But all this sort of stuff here is very fascinating. 'Cause I always obviously knew that the green byproducts
Yep.
that I get from my jobs that I'm doing, like they got to go somewhere. And I knew it was something like this, but there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
And our new facility at East Kerala is going to cost us about $45 million to build.
Wow.
So if everyone could accept paying another, few bucks a kilo for their compost, we'd be stoked.
Right, well, I think this might convert them a little bit, just this process we're looking at here. All right, let's go next bit. So we're just walking past this.
Yep.
This is Humicarb, a finished product.
Yes.
So we're going to go look at machinery in a second, but you were telling me this is the most mature, or likely the most mature?
Yeah, some of
compost?
the most mature compost in Australia is Humicarb. We've produced it for over 15, 16 years now, and a lot of people will see this in bags at their soil yard,
Yes.
20-litre bags. Another product that comes off Humicarb is the very fine particle, which is what we call Turf Perfect.
Yes.
And Turf Perfect is perfect, and Humicarb is perfect for in Western Australia, where you get like you might have part of your lawn die because it dries out and it gets
Localised
sandy
dry
stuff.
spot,
yeah.
yep.
And so you turn this into the sand, and what it does, it absolutely transforms that sand into soil, and the
Yes.
grass will readily grow through it.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Humicarb is that once we've done our 8 to 12 weeks of processing, it'll sit on my pad for another 3 to 6 months as we add the love to it, which we spoke about
Yep.
previously, so that it matures and matures and matures. And this is looking a little bit dry at the moment, the boys will need to give it some love probably this week, but this is what will go down to that real smeary Vegemite stuff. I'll just dig a little bit deeper in the pile, see if we can get some wet stuff.
It has been very dry in Perth. Surprise.
So what you've seen is that is dry because the fire fang's gone all the way through it, and the fire fang, that fungi makes it non-wetting as well. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work in this stuff to get it to go, but ultimately that should really smear through your hands.
When you get really deep down into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've done it before, even just recently, because of obviously the temperature and stuff, where we take, say, our soil sampler, which is about the width of a golf ball for people who are just listening, and we'll take a core out of the soil, and we're not even looking at the soil. We might have a localised dry spot where we would take, say, 10, 15 cores out of a 1 square metre area,
Yep.
and then just a bag of compost and put it in. So really I should be using this
Yep.
even more than just the standard compost that we've had.
Yeah, something that's really highly mature, because that'll just, once again, it's all about that carbon and the complexity of it. Its ability to hold moisture,
Yeah.
its ability to hold nutrients, its ability to keep sting nematodes at bay. That's what you want.
Tell me about sting nematodes. This is. I wasn't going to ask this early,
Yep.
but something happened the other week where I saw in a bag of one of your products, it advertised. This is a photo online. It advertised that it. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was controlling nematodes.
Yep.
And somebody commented on that, who I have a lot of respect for, and they were like, "Oh, I'd be very cautious of that," because they had never heard of the company. They're from the outside of the country, never heard of the company, never heard about any of this, and they thought that this was just a way too bold claim, somebody who's overstating the facts to potentially, no, not claiming that you would do it, but be careful, because maybe it is someone who's overstating the facts
Yep.
just to make some money. But you've done some trials, right?
Yeah, we've done trials probably for the last 10 or so years to show that this stuff works. Meadow Springs Sports Complex, City of Mandurah is up for $1 million of new turf. We sort of came with Ken Johnson, who's Sports Turf Technology Australia or someone like that. Very scientifically based trial, collected some soil with nematodes, mixed our compost with some water to make a leachate, and where we treat it with the compost, the nematode were retarded or they died from that. Now, anecdotally, the trials work. I can't tell you the magic thing that does it. I just know that it works.
Okay.
And as we go further in there, we think it's something to do with the nature of the immature compost, maybe a bit of nitrogen that's sort of just not letting them have as much fun as they should when they're eating our roots, right?
Yeah.
So lots of our local councils where they have these sting nematode issues, they use our plush lawn that we started the podcast with.
Which is what we've used plenty of times.
Yep, with a little bit of Turf Perfect stirred in there, just to really give you the quick nutrient release, which keeps your lawn healthy. And of course, you know yourself, if you get run down, you're more likely to pick up a cold from someone or from the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
If your turf's not healthy, it's just more open or susceptible to disease. So what we find in Western Australia is that our soil temperatures around Perth area anyway, don't reach the level where the lawn effectively stops growing. So what we find, and we do some work with local councils
here
as well.
Winter?
During winter,
we don't quite get cold enough for full dormancy. You
just keep a little bit of feed up to them, and the lawn will thrive over winter as well, and bring you in terms of sports playing fields, brings you into that summer period out of winter with a much healthier turf.
Yeah, I've talked to this with Brenton multiple times, because one of the things that we've had is over east, a lot of people really don't like kikuyu.
Yep.
But kikuyu is a predominant thing that's used on ovals here, and the school oval that we maintain, it definitely doesn't quite go dormant. It really slows down.
Yep.
And you do get more wear and tear in the goldmouths, but it's completely different to over east, where you've got, say, central, New South Wales, Victoria, Canberra area, where it really gets cold, loses a lot of colour. Anyway, so yeah, it's all the sort of stuff that we worked on. So yeah, so the sting nematodes, it does have an effect. You don't know what it's doing specifically.
Someone wants to come and do a PhD on it and tell me what it is. I'm happy for that to happen.
That would be awesome, because I also talked to, there's a guy who, but for people who are listening, there's a turf farm over here called Lovegroves, and Dick Lovegrove, many years ago I had a phone call with him, and he brought up nematodes because I had a problem on an oval, and it wasn't nematodes. He was basically like, if you got nematodes, just give up, redo it. A couple of weeks ago, I had some other contractors up north who had heard that the school had replaced the oval because they had armyworm, and they were laughing at it, going, how stupid is that? You can just apply general products and you could get rid of it. And I was like, I bet you it wasn't armyworm, I bet you it was nematode, and a teacher has misunderstood and just gone, it was some sort of bug, I think it was armyworm, and then you know how the Chinese whispers works. But it is a really big problem.
Yep.
So maybe many people who maybe work in different areas, I don't know if this is around the whole country that this problem occurs, but they may have never heard of it and they just go, oh, cool, kills a bug. No, this is actually millions of dollars to replace ovals because there's no other option. And if this does work, you don't quite know what it is, that's a massive win. That's
right, exactly right. And the best thing is that it's a natural product. We're not relying on a pesticide. We're introducing another chemical into playing fields, particularly around schools and stuff like that. And we see the effects almost instantly.
Let's go have a look at the equipment.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell me about this one, Greg.
Yeah, so this is a new bit of kit that we're trialling. So as you've heard me say that optimum moisture is essential before it goes out from my yard.
Yep.
So what we're doing here is we're making up our compost that's going out to Broadacre Agriculture. So we've done a screen, we've got it down to the right size. It's probably a little bit dry after the process and the heat. So what we're doing here is we're running across a machine that mixes it and actually injects moisture into the compost and falls out the top so that it's ready to go.
Right.
And at the moment, we've got about 2,500 tonnes a week of that going out, which is about 50 road trains a week.
So basically 10 every working day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
We've already seen a couple come through.
Yeah, they leave here at about 6:30, 7 o'clock. Then they'll be back again just after lunch to refill, and out they go again.
Wow.
So if you come here by the end of April, early May, all of these piles that we're looking around, they'll be gone. Wow. Because it'll have all gone out. Yep.
So I would hate to think about how expensive all this is, because you're telling me for $400,000 for the digger and $1 million for this, and
Yep.
that thing looks bigger than the rest of them. I don't know if it's more technical or whatever.
No, that's actually one of the cheaper bits of kit on site. That's only $500,000.
Yeah.
The star screen that you just saw on film there was, that's $1 million. That's a 3-stage screen and does the separation. As you can see, the contamination coming out the oversized load. That's the stuff we don't want to see in green waste. You know, we got to keep the plastic out.
Yeah, of course. Do microplastics affect the soil at all? A lot of people talk about that when it comes to human health and how much you eat, just because your food's in packaging and things like that. But obviously, like, you're in this process where you are chopping things up and mixing it around, and does that have an effect on it, or it doesn't really matter?
Microplastics is something that's definitely on our radar. You know, we have compostable plastics, we have biodegradable plastics, and so on. The compostable ones in our process will get eaten by the bugs. The biodegradable ones will continue through, and you'll see the blue stuff in that pile of oversize over there. You know, that might be a biodegradable plastic, hasn't done. Those screens actually have a vacuum on them as well, so from the mulch fraction, it sucks the soft plastic out so that we can decontaminate our mulch. But it's really interesting you mentioned microplastics, because I was reading an article the other day that says that they're getting into our bloodstream.
Yeah.
And that they're potentially causing heart attacks. So that's really scary, right? So that's something we've got to get on board with as a community, and certainly as a composter. Where we go into food producing areas, we need to be careful about make sure we're testing for that.
Now back to food producing areas. How's this for a segue? You were telling me that you're adding gypsum and other products to the compost that you're doing out for these farms.
Yes.
To help them get specifically the right type of nutrients or the pH or whatever it is they're looking for.
Yep.
For the specific crop they're doing as well, right?
That's right. So that's where our scientific people come in as well, our agronomists that say, if you're growing canola, you need this. The compost brings you to there, and the customer's actually paid for us to blend that gypsum in with it and a little bit of mop to go with it, so that when he goes out, he's only got one job. He just has to spread the compost. He doesn't have to spread the compost and then spread the fertiliser and
spread the gypsum.
It's just done, one pass.
Now, another question some people might have, because there are, with top dressing, back to lawns, when we've top dressed with plush lawn, I might just wait for this big bit of wind to go past, if it ever does. So moving back to lawns, gardens, so we use plush lawn, but we really only use that when the lawn's already pretty level.
Yep.
When we have lawns with massive undulations, it does sort of break down and you have to keep doing it. So you got to put some sand in, and you do have products that are mixtures of sand and compost for that purpose, right?
Yep.
But what you were saying is, as we drive in, I noted on how rubbish the quality of the sand on just the ground driving in here was. You're not using just any sand in that, right?
No, we produce quality products and we need quality inputs to do that. So all the sand that we use is a PGA certified sand, so Professional Golfing Association. I think that's what it stands for, certified sand. So it has certain characteristics, like it has, might be a maximum of 8% clay, or it might be a certain particle size distribution, all that sort of stuff. And we've worked with our turf growers and our contractors like Ken to say, okay, what does this need to look like so that it brings the compost and the carbon for what we want it to do, but it also brings that free draining sand that turf needs, and it's not going to clump up with clay and stuff like that. So that's where we've done our research, and our blends are all about being able to provide a top dress that you've spoken about lumps already and flowability. Well, when you're putting out 1,000 tonne across an oval, it needs to flow out the back of a spreader. It can't be lumpy and can't be clogging up. So we're very cautious around that.
I have actually found that when we use the blend, we don't have the clumping problem.
Yep.
That's what I said before. It's kind of a problem, but it's also kind of the exact reason why you're putting it down.
Right. Yeah.
It's difficult to work with, but also that's why you need it, because the sandy rubbish that we got here has got to have something that holds something.
That's it. Yeah. Interestingly, on some subdivisions, what we've tried to do where they're building their ovals is, because typically they dig all the topsoil out and then they import sand and then they import compost. to do it. So where we're actually moving there, and this is probably a bit of our sustainability that we're pushing through the sea life area of our business, is to go, well, we don't need to take all that sand and use that somewhere else. If we bring the right compost with the right, characteristics, we can actually put that in to the crappy sand, and you can still have an oval on it without having to cart thousands of tons of sand in and out.
Yep.
And that's a big sustainability thing that we're trying to do.
Here's a follow-up question that's probably so broad you could spend an hour on it, right? But everything we've covered so far, right, I feel like we've got about all the processes covered, really. We've talked about just about everything. But what do you still feel that people, or that you wish people would understand about compost? What do you think is the biggest thing that you really want people to really get home about the whole idea of using it?
I think the big thing for me is that there's never been more focus on carbon within our country, right? Carbon story is the biggest story in Australia right now. How do we reduce our personal footprints? How do we take carbon dioxide out of the air? How do we do that? And that's where I think composting, the process of composting and adding the final product to the soil, it's not the sausage, it's the sizzle. How do I as an individual and my home garden level change the planet? Well, you can start using compost instead of using synthetic fertiliser. Because the fertiliser can lead to other issues. You overwater, it runs to the groundwater table, whereas compost, it contains the nutrition, and if you do have to use a little bit of synthetic fertiliser, it provides the structure for the ground or the soil to hold that fertiliser. Holds fertiliser, holds water, builds a healthier soil, grows a healthier plant, more photosynthesis, less carbon dioxide.
And that ultimately is, I guess, what the bigger meaning is for you.
Yep.
Because yes, nice plants are very nice. Nice crops are obviously even more important because that's actually feeding human beings. But then long term, you're also being a part of, hopefully, changing the carbon and long term having a bit of an effect.
Paradigm shift is what we're about.
Well, mate, I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, pleasure to have you around.
You would think walking around a pile of smelly compost and essentially dirt would be a really bad time, but I've actually really enjoyed it.
No, I've enjoyed showing you around. I mean, it's definitely got a complexity that a lot of people don't immediately assume.
Way more involved than just throwing a bunch of apple peels and lawn clippings on a pile and hoping for the best.
Yep, exactly.
So, all right, mate, well, thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode. All right, friends, before you go, firstly, well done for making it to the end of the podcast. Secondly, if you have made it to the end of the podcast, you obviously liked the podcast. If you do like the podcast, which you clearly do because you made it to the end, if you do like it, can you share it? Can you comment? Can you give us ratings? All that sort of stuff. Support in some way, because this is not a big production. And believe it or not, those little things actually make massive differences to the algorithm, helping people find the podcast. And ultimately, if you enjoyed it, maybe somebody else will. So I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for supporting and listening all the way. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Anyways, I'll see you in the next podcast.